The digital slate felt heavy in Keth's three-fingered manipulator, though its mass was negligible. It was the weight of the words on the display that pressed down on him, a heavy, suffocating linguistic density that made his lateral nostrils flare in irritation. The file was designated Case Study 479, Humanity. The subheader was what caused the Rulian cadet to tap his hoof against the metal floor of the archive room in a staccato rhythm of disbelief. It read, Classification Meta-Predator. Keth looked up from the slate, his wide, golden eyes scanning the quiet hum of the library. It was a sanctuary of logic, a place where the chaotic biology of the galaxy was catalogued and made safe through understanding. But this file felt like a clerical error. He was a Rulian, a species that had evolved on the vast, grassy plains of Rull. They were prey, historically speaking, though they had long since outsmarted their predators through technology and cooperation. He knew what a predator looked like. He knew the sharp angles of the Tyros with their serrated mandibles and the silent, slithering grace of the Vexen. Humans, however, looked like shaved monkeys. They were soft. They lacked claws. Their teeth were blunt, save for the pathetic canines that barely qualified as tearing instruments. They had no armor, no venom, and their night vision was laughable. To classify them as meta-predators, a designation reserved for species that dominated not just a niche, but entire planetary energy cycles, seemed like a bad joke by the Galactic Council's Xenobiology Department. His assignment was clear: validate or refute the classification. The Academy required a thesis from all senior cadets, and Keth, with his background in behavioral xenology, had drawn the short straw. He had to shadow Cadet Vance. Vance was currently sitting 3 tables away, doing absolutely nothing of interest. The human was leaning back in his chair, eyes half closed, listening to an audio feed. He looked harmless. His skin was a pale beige that flushed red when the temperature changed, a sign of poor thermal regulation. He was drinking a cup of stimulant fluid, something called coffee, which smelled faintly of burnt nuts. Keth stood up, the joints of his digitigrade legs clicking softly, and approached the human. He needed to establish a baseline before the field exercises began tomorrow. Vance, the human said, without opening his eyes. You are hovering. Keth started, his ears swiveling back. I did not mean to intrude. I am merely preparing for our shared deployment. Vance opened one eye. It was a dull brown, featuring a round pupil that contracted lazily in the library's light. You are the Rulian assigned to the survival track. Keth, right? Correct. Keth pulled a chair opposite the human and sat, folding his long, grassy-smelling limbs. I wanted to discuss the parameters of the exercise. We will be dropped in Sector 4. The simulation is a temperate, dense forest. High moisture, fluctuating temperatures. I know, Vance said, finally sitting up and stretching. His arms were corded with muscle, but it was lean muscle, not the explosive bulk of a shock trooper. I packed rain gear. Keth gestured to the slate. I am reviewing your species profile. It suggests I should be wary of you. Vance smiled. It was a baring of teeth that humans used for social lubrication, but looking at the flat, grinding molars in the back of that mouth, Keth felt a twinge of the absurdity of his assignment. Do you feel like you need to be wary, Keth? No, Keth admitted. Honestly, I worry you will not be able to keep up. The Rulian physiology is built for distance. We can trot for days without stopping. The Tyros cadets will be hunting. If we are caught, we fail. We will not be caught, Vance said, his voice terrifyingly calm. And we will not fail. The confidence was baseless, but Keth logged it in his mental notes. Subject displays unwarranted optimism regarding survival chances. The dropship rattled as it breached the atmospheric shielding of the training moon. The interior was dimly lit by red tactical lights, casting long, dancing shadows across the faces of the cadets. There were 12 of them in this squad. 3 Tyros clicking their mandibles in anticipation of the hunt, 2 Vexen coiled in their seats, 4 Rulians including Keth, all looking varying degrees of nervous, and 1 human. Vance sat with his eyes closed, his breathing slow and rhythmic. While the Rulians' hearts were fluttering at 120 beats per minute, the human seemed to be asleep. Instructor Rel, a massive reptilian veteran of the border wars, paced the aisle. The gravity boots of his suit clanked heavily. Listen up, Rel hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air. This is not a game. The biofencing is active, but the creatures inside are real. The terrain is real. You have one objective: traverse the 80 kilometers to the extraction point. You have rations for 2 days. The march will take 5. You do the math. Keth looked at his ration pack. It was a nutrient-dense brick of algae paste, efficient but joyless. He glanced at Vance. The human was checking the straps on his pack. He had a knife, a simple strip of steel with a polymer grip, strapped to his thigh. It looked primitive compared to the vibro blades the Tyros carried. Zone drop in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. The floor dropped out. The gravity chutes caught them, slowing their descent until they hit the mud of Sector 4 with a wet thud. The air was thick, smelling of decaying vegetation, ozone, and wet fur. The sky was a bruised purple, choked with clouds. "Move out," Vance whispered. It was not a command, but a statement of fact. The human was already moving, sliding into the undergrowth with a silence that belied his clumsy-looking feet. Keth scrambled to follow, his hooves sinking into the loam. For the first 6 hours, they did nothing but move. Keth was impressed by the human's stamina. Vance did not run. He walked with a swinging, ground-eating stride that wasted no energy. He stepped over roots that Keth tripped on. He ducked under branches that slapped Keth in the face. By the time the twin suns began to dip below the horizon, the forest had darkened into a claustrophobic tangle of shadows. Keth was panting, his cooling frills flushing with heat. "We stop here," Vance said, pointing to a small depression near the roots of a massive fungal tree. "It is too exposed," Keth argued, his instincts screaming for open ground where he could see predators coming. "No," Vance said. "It is downwind of the game trail, and there is water." Keth watched as Vance dropped his pack. The human did not sit down immediately. Instead, he began to prowl the perimeter of their small campsite. He was looking at the ground, touching leaves, smelling the air. "What are you doing?" Keth asked. Checking the pantry, Vance muttered. Keth did not understand the idiom. He sat and opened his ration brick, taking a small, dry bite. He watched Vance. The human had stopped near a rotting log. With a sudden, violent motion, Vance kicked the log over. Keth flinched. "Why would you?" Vance dropped to one knee. His hand shot out, faster than Keth would have credited him capable of, and snatched something from the dirt. He stood up holding a wriggling, many-legged creature the size of a hand. It was a dark, oily, chitinous thing, snapping pinchers that dripped with mild neurotoxin. "Disgusting," Keth said. "Put it down." Vance did not put it down. He produced his knife. With a clinical precision that made Keth's stomach turn, the human severed the creature's head, then used the tip of the blade to flick out a gland near the thorax. "Poison sac," Vance explained, his voice devoid of emotion. Then he impaled the twitching body on a stick. He gathered dry moss and twigs, striking a spark with a ferro rod. A small fire crackled to life. Vance held the insect over the flame. The smell of burning chitin was acrid, but beneath it was the scent of cooking protein. "You are going to eat that?" Keth asked, his algae brick suddenly feeling heavy in his stomach. "Calories," Vance said. He pulled the stick back. The meat inside the shell had turned white. He peeled the shell away and took a bite. He chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and took another. Keth stared. The Tyros ate meat, but they hunted large game, tearing throats with dignity. This was scavenging. It was opportunistic. It was indiscriminate. "It tastes like shrimp," Vance offered, holding out a piece of the white meat. "I am a herbivore," Keth said, recoiling. "Suit yourself." Vance finished the creature, tossed the shell into the fire to burn away the scent, and then kicked dirt over the coals to extinguish them. "We sleep in shifts, 3 hours on, 3 off." Keth took the first watch, his eyes scanning the dark. He looked at the sleeping human. Vance looked peaceful, his chest rising and falling. But there was grease on his lips, the residue of a life he had snuffed out simply because it was there. Observation log, Day 1. The human displays a lack of dietary discrimination, will consume lower life forms without hesitation. No ritual, no thrill of the hunt, merely fuel acquisition. The second day brought rain. It was a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked into Keth's fur and made his joints ache. The terrain grew rougher, the trees denser. They were tracking the extraction point, but they were not alone. Keth could smell the musk of the Tyros squad somewhere to the east. The predators were cutting a path through the forest, likely looking for the Rulians to tag and eliminate from the exercise. Vance changed his gait. He became slower, more deliberate. He stopped frequently to stare at things that Keth could not see. A broken twig, a patch of flattened moss, a smear of mud on a leaf. They are close, Vance said around midday. The Tyros? Keth whispered. No, something else. Vance veered off the planned azimuth. Keth followed, anxious. We are leaving the optimal path, Vance. We need energy, Vance said. The algae bricks are gone. Keth had finished his ration that morning. He was hungry, but he could forage. He reached out to pluck a handful of broad, green leaves from a bush. Don't, Vance said, not looking back. Why? Look at the veins. Purple tint. Nightshade family or the local equivalent. It will shut down your kidneys in 6 hours. Keth dropped the leaf, trembling. How do you know that? Basic biosurvey. And look at the bugs. Nothing is eating it. If the insects won't touch it, neither should you. They walked for another hour. The hunger was becoming a dull ache in Keth's center. Suddenly, Vance froze. He held up a hand, fist closed. Keth stopped mid-step, balancing on one hoof. Vance lowered his profile, sinking into a crouch. He pointed through the foliage. In a clearing ahead, there was a creature. It was a hexapod, roughly the size of a large dog covered in shaggy gray fur. It was rooting in the dirt with a long, flexible snout. It looked peaceful. Keth watched, expecting Vance to bypass it. The creature was too big to tackle with a knife, and they had no projectile weapons. To engage it would be a waste of energy and a risk of injury. Vance unclipped his belt. He removed his tunic, wrapping it around his left forearm until it formed a thick, padded gauntlet. He gripped his knife in his right hand, blade reversed, running along his forearm. Stay here, Vance breathed. He did not charge. He did not roar. He moved forward with a terrifying, sliding silence. He placed his feet on the outsides of his soles, rolling them inward to dampen the sound of crushed leaves. He used the wind, keeping it in his face so his scent would be carried away from the prey. It was a stalk, but it was not the excited, jittery stalk of a tyros. It was mechanical. It was the movement of a machine designed to close distance. The hexapod lifted its head, ears twitching. It sensed something. It looked right at the bush where Vance was hiding. Vance did not move, he did not even blink. He became a statue. The predator's greatest asset, Keth realized, was not speed but patience. The ability to suspend time. The hexapod relaxed, returning to its digging. In that second, Vance exploded. It was not a run, it was a burst of kinetic energy. He covered the 10 meters in 3 bounds. The hexapod squealed, turning to flee, but it was too late. Vance collided with it. It was a mess of limbs and fur. The creature snapped, its teeth tearing into the padded tunic on Vance's arm. Keth wanted to look away, to cover his ears against the sounds of struggle. But he watched. He saw Vance absorb the impact, using the creature's momentum to roll it onto its side. The human disregarded the teeth sinking into his protective wrapping. He was focused on one thing. His right hand moved in a blur. One strike. The squealing stopped. Vance stood up, breathing hard but not frantically. He looked at the dead animal. He looked at his arm, unwinding the tattered tunic. There was a bruise forming, but the skin was unbroken. Keth stepped into the clearing, his legs shaking. That was risky, calculated, Vance corrected. He wiped the knife on the creature's fur. High protein density, liver, heart, muscle tissue. The hide can be used to insulate our boots against the mud. The bones can be cracked for marrow. He looked at Keth. You look horrified. You killed it, Keth said. We are hungry. It is the efficiency. Keth struggled to find the words. You did not hate it. You did not fear it. You just deleted it. Vance knelt by the carcass. He made an incision from the sternum to the pelvis. It is a biological machine, Keth, just like me, just like you. It converts solar energy into grass, grass into muscle. I am just intercepting the energy transfer. Vance began to butcher the animal. He did not just take the prime cuts. He took the organs. He cut out the tongue. He saved the fat deposits. He worked with the speed of a surgeon and the brutality of a butcher. Keth turned away and found a patch of safe tubers Vance had pointed out earlier. He chewed on the starchy roots, trying to ignore the sound of wet tearing behind him. That night, Vance cooked. He built a smokeless fire in a small pit. He roasted the meat on green sticks. He ate with a steady, relentless rhythm. He consumed the liver first, then the heart. He cracked the long bones with a rock and sucked out the marrow. He offered a piece of cooked muscle to Keth. No, Keth said. Vance shrugged and ate it himself. Nothing goes to waste, he said softly. That is the rule of the meta-predator. We do not specialize, we adapt. If it swims, we make nets. If it flies, we make arrows. If it runs, we track it until it dies of exhaustion. If it has poison, we cook it. If it has a shell, we smash it. He looked at Keth across the firelight, grease shining on his chin. There is nothing in this galaxy that we cannot turn into human. That is why you are scared. I am not scared, Keth lied. You should be, Vance said, not unkindly, because if I was starving and you were dead, I would not waste you either. Keth did not sleep that night. Observation log, day 3. The subject's digestive plasticity is alarming. He consumes toxins that require thermal denaturation. He consumes organ meats high in cholesterol and iron. He is a furnace. He does not coexist with the biosphere, he processes it. Day 5 was the gauntlet. The extraction point was located atop a ridge, separated from them by a vast, swampy lowland. The mud was hip-deep in places. The air buzzed with biting insects. They were tired. Keth's legs burned with lactic acid. His hooves were softening in the wet. Vance looked haggard, his face covered in stubble, his eyes sunken, but his pace had not slowed. If anything, he seemed to have entered a trance state. They were 2 kilometers from the ridge when the apex predator found them. It was not part of the simulation. Or perhaps it was, and the instructors had dialed the difficulty to lethal. It was a saurian, a bipedal reptile standing 3 meters tall, with scales the color of wet slate and a mouth full of serrated daggers. It roared, a sound that vibrated in Keth's chest cavity. Run, Keth bleated, his herd instincts taking over. He turned to bolt. Stop, Vance barked. The command froze Keth. You cannot outrun it, Vance said. It has a stride length of 2 meters. It is fast-twitch muscle. You are exhausted. If you run, you trigger its chase reflex. You die tired. What do we do? Keth whimpered. The saurian hissed, lowering its head. It was assessing them. It saw a small, soft thing and a slightly larger, nervous thing. Vance stepped in front of Keth. He looked tiny against the reptile. Give me your spear, Vance said. Keth had fashioned a sharpened stick, more for walking than fighting. He handed it to the human. Vance took it. He did not hold it like a weapon. He held it like a tool. He planted the base of the spear in the mud, angling the point up toward the beast's chest. Back away slowly, Vance said. The saurian lunged. It was a blur of motion. The beast expected the prey to flee. It expected a chase. It did not expect the prey to stand its ground and become a spike. The beast's weight did the work. It impaled itself on the spear. The wood groaned and snapped, but the point drove deep into the soft scales of the throat. The saurian thrashed, screaming. A tail whip caught Vance, sending him flying into the muck. The human hit a tree with a sickening crunch. Vance, Keth screamed. The saurian was choking, blood frothing from its mouth, but it was not dead. It turned toward Vance, who was struggling to rise. The human's left arm was hanging at an odd angle, broken. The beast stepped forward to crush the human. Vance did not scream. He did not beg. With his good hand, he pulled the knife from his belt. He looked at the massive, dying monster towering over him, and he looked. Annoyed, he waited. When the beast lowered its head to bite, Vance drove the knife into the creature's eye. He twisted the blade. The brain stem was severed. The massive reptile collapsed, its bulk missing Vance by inches. Silence returned to the swamp. Keth scrambled over to Vance. You are hurt. Your arm, Vance looked at his arm, ulna fracture. Clean break, though, I can set it. He looked at the dead saurian. It was massive, hundreds of kilograms of meat. Vance licked his lips. We need to go, Keth said. The extraction point. Vance did not move. He was staring at the carcass. The calculation was visible in his eyes. We cannot carry it, Vance said, sounding genuinely regretful. Carry it. Keth stared at him. It tried to eat us. And it failed, Vance said. Now it is resources. Vance stood up, wincing as his broken arm shifted. He walked to the beast. With one hand, he sliced a strip of flesh from the creature's flank. It was raw, bloody, and tough. He put it in his mouth. He chewed, his jaw working grimly. He swallowed. Protein for the climb, he said. He looked at Keth. The alien cadet backed away. In that moment, the scale of the meta-predator classification clicked into place. The Tyros hunted for sport and honor. The Vexen hunted for territory. Humans hunted because the universe was made of food. Vance was injured, exhausted, and covered in mud. But standing there, chewing on the raw flesh of a creature 10 times his size, He looked like the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. He looked inevitable. "Let's go," Vance said, cutting another strip and stuffing it into his pocket. "We have a schedule to keep." The extraction zone was a flat plateau of rock. The dropship was waiting, its engines whining. Instructor Rel stood at the ramp, checking a chronoslate. 2 groups had already failed. The Tyros squad had been bogged down in the marshes. The Vexen had tapped out due to hypothermia. Vance and Keth crested the ridge. Vance was pale, holding his broken arm against his chest. Keth was supporting him, though the Rulian looked on the verge of collapse himself. Rel looked at them. He looked at Vance's arm. He looked at the blood around Vance's mouth, blood that was not human. "Report," Rel barked. "Mission accomplished," Vance rasped. "Objective reached." Rel sniffed the air. He smelled the saurian blood on Vance. His vertical pupils dilated. "You encountered the Alpha asset." "Neutralized," Vance said. Rel paused. "Neutralized, consumed," Keth whispered. Rel looked at the Rulian. "What did you say, cadet?" Keth looked at Vance. The human was leaning against the landing strut, eyes closed, conserving energy. He looked small again. Harmless, but Keth knew better. "He consumed it, sir," Keth said, his voice trembling. "Not all of it, but enough." Rel looked at the human with a new expression. It was not respect. It was the wariness of one predator recognizing a superior one. "Get on board," Rel said quietly. Back at the academy, the debriefing was sterile and bright. The medics had set Vance's arm and pumped him full of regenerative nanites. He was sitting in the mess hall 3 days later, looking as if nothing had happened. Keth sat at his table, the final report open on his slate. Subject: humanity, classification, metapredator, status confirmed. He looked across the room. Vance was eating. He had a tray piled high. There was a synthesized steak, a bowl of grain, a pile of green vegetables, a fruit compote, and a glass of milk. Vance cut the steak. He forked the vegetables. He drank the milk, plant, animal, mineral, liquid, solid, it didn't matter. A Tyros cadet walked by Vance's table, bumping his chair. The reptilian sneered, baring its fangs. "Watch it, soft skin," the Tyros growled. Vance stopped chewing. He looked up. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't flare his nostrils. He just looked at the Tyros. He looked at the Tyros's neck, then his liver, then his femoral artery. It was the look of a man checking a pantry. The Tyros, sensing something it couldn't name, stepped back. The sneer faded. The reptile hurried away. Vance went back to his meal. Keth finished typing his conclusion. "The danger of the human species is not in their natural weaponry, of which they have none. It is in their capacity to view all other life forms not as enemies or rivals or even equals, but simply as potential energy. They do not kill out of anger. They kill out of arithmetic, and they will eat the universe if given the chance." Keth closed the file. He felt a cold knot in his stomach that he knew would never go away. He watched Vance wipe his mouth with a napkin, clean, civilized, and terrifying. The human stood up, tray empty. He caught Keth's eye and waved. A friendly gesture. Keth waved back, his hand shaking. Vance walked out of the hall, ready for the next course.